So I'm Auntie Kerry. I'm the Professor and Associate Dean in the School of Medicine at Western Sydney University, and I'm also the Academic Lead for Marajula Budjari Gumal, or SPHERE, in Sydney. I'm also the Chair for the subcommittee, for the Indigenous subcommittee, and I've been asked to do a welcome and acknowledgement for people visiting us today. So I can do a welcome in my country. So I have two areas of Australia which is mine. So I have the Sydney one and up around the borders where my father comes from. But looking at this map, you can see that every part of Australia had somebody to call it home, and especially around the waterways of Australia, you can see that there were lots and lots of people. So my mother was Katagaliura and I grew up on Darkinjung country. And I'm coming to you today from Darug country. And so we acknowledge the traditional owners and the people that have looked after the country since time began. This is from my mother's country. This is actually in the harbour in Sydney. You'd think that there was no Indigenous culture left in the cities, and yet it's everywhere. This is a kitchen site where women would go and prepare meals. So they would make bread. And here you can see that there are lots of places around the area where you would have had women in the canoes and men also in the canoes cooking their little pippies and shellfish and other things. And this is Pemulwuy. So he's also Katagaliura, and he taught people a song of welcome that I would normally sing with my clapsticks, but somebody has nicked my clappies. How sad is that? But I'd like you to, if you can learn it, that would be really grand, because next time Helen is going to sing this with me, she said. So it's Barabula Barama Mangane Wenguna, Barabula Barama Mangane Wenguna, Barabula Barama Mangane Wenguna. And that means welcome, welcome, and thrice welcome. And again, we welcome you wherever you are. And we hope that you enjoyed this wonderful webinar that we've got. If you look around though, you will see that the people that are talking to you today are leaders. And it's not just leadership that we want you to be concerned about when you're looking at your career. It's issues around what it looks like to lead in a cultural way. So Indigenous people are very collectivist people, and you might know some people who from you or your culture who are as well. So our leadership looks very mindful. It looks very servant type leadership, where we are responsible not only to the organisations that we work for, but to our communities as well and our families as well. So and let me just, before I go, put in a little plug, if you like, for our awards. So we are giving out awards for Indigenous researchers for early and mid-career. If you're interested in that, please look up our website, or you can email me. I'm the only Auntie Kerry Doyle in captivity, so I'm fairly easy to find. Let me please, though, introduce the rest of this wonderful panel that you'll be working with. So first of all is Mariam Melsa. She's an organisational psychologist and PhD candidate at the Monash Centre for Health and Research Implementation, and she is joined with Professor Helena Teide. And on the panel, we've got Helena and myself. You have the wonderful Kate Nagel, who is there, and Professor Vicky Clifton. You have Associate Professor Ravani Dugan. Wave. Oh, okay. Thank you. And you have Ms. Lorna Marakumi Gold. She's the Post-Research Fellow for Post South Australia and Northern Territory. And she comes from, how do you say it?
Mabantwa.
Mabantwa,
Alice Springs.
Alice Springs, or as we say in my language, Ali Pring. And finally, Professor Helena will close for us. So let me hand over now to the wonderful Mariam and Helena.
Thank you so much, Auntie Kerry, and I've got to learn the words to that song. I have to say, I really enjoy it.
That was such a beautiful song.
Yeah, Mariam's just going to share the slides here. So I'm going to talk to you just briefly, and then Mariam will primarily present, and we will banter between us, and then we're going to have a lovely panel as Auntie Kerry has suggested. So this work comes to you today, or this is mentoring program, and great to see so many of you online. Really fantastic to have you engaged. This is in the context of the Women's Health Research Translation Network. Linda will put the details in the chat, including the website landing page, and you can sign up for our newsletter and find more us about it. But essentially, this is a group of a network across the 10 NHMRC accredited research translation centres that are primarily targeted with actually getting evidence into practice to serve our community, as Auntie Kerry so lovely was described so well. That network sits across the 10 centres and under the national alliance of those centres called the Australian Health Research Alliance. So please do look at the website, understand a bit more about what we do. One of our key objectives in our $5 million program funded by the MRFF is to build capacity in careers, focusing on young women. It was a particular target of the government and a priority of the government to focus on advancing careers of women in early and mid-career stages. And this is just one of a series of strategies, including the funding program. Auntie Kerry's highlighted opportunities to be mentored and to join our leadership groups on our committees. And we really do encourage you to find out more and engage. It's also in the context of a project I'm just going to very briefly highlight before Mariam talks about mentorship. And this is called the Advancing Women in Healthcare Leadership, and that's both healthcare and academic medicine. So the problem, there is evidence everywhere about the problem. Essentially, there's a great deal of literature showing significant and persistent and more recently worsening gender equity. In healthcare, which is really quite interesting, not only is 75% of the workforce actually associates with being female, but actually 1 in every 4 working women in Australia work in healthcare, and a significant proportion then work in the education and academic sector. And despite that very high prevalence, if you look further up the chain in terms of leadership positions, there's a lot of service at the bottom and not much escalation to the top. And this is not a pipeline issue. There have been equity in terms of medical careers, but mainly predominantly actually women in nursing for many, many decades, and this has not resulted in a change in that balance. So most of the literature is on the problem. Next slide, please, Mariam. We have brought together a national partnership that actually will feed into and work alongside the National Partnership for the Australian Women's Health Research Alliance across public and private enterprise in healthcare, academic organisations here and overseas, colleges, government, and many other bodies to actually look at how we can fix this as a systems problem. Next slide, please. And there's been a great deal of work on this. So without going into this too much effort, the first stage, phase 1 there, is about how we establish what works. And I'm going to speak very briefly to this to contextualise Mariam's point. What works in the context of supporting the individual within an organisation. This is really important because up until now, it's very much been seen as a problem of the individual. And that doesn't matter whether we're talking about gender inequity or diversity or intersectionality of any description. In fact, we have to be really careful that our intersectionality argument doesn't individualise each person too much and take us away from that really important collective voice. Individuals are really important as a perspective, but it makes it very hard for them to change the system. So we need to look at groups as collectives with a powerful voice, as well as individuals within that collective. And I know Auntie Kerry may have some perspectives on that from an Indigenous perspective, but from gender, it's so often been in the silo of individuals. And what this body of work does is move it above individuals and actually create a system that those individuals can work in. So in essence, we've done the first body of work funded by the NHMRC around high quality evidence synthesis. We've done 120 qualitative interviews, all sorts of sophisticated work. And I have to credit Mariam in her PhD, who's done a vast majority of this foundational work in the first stage. We are now developing the organisational interventions. We're working with government who are actually benchmarking, and we're up to implementation and scale up. Next slide. And so here we are. So this is the result of Mariam's systematic review, a great labour of love, which is published in Lancet eClinical Medicine and attracted an editorial in the Lancet. And the 5 areas that come out of all sectors, doesn't matter whether it's healthcare or not, that improve and advance women's careers and create opportunities are these 5. And you'll see that mentoring and networks and leadership development are 2 of those really critical areas. And they're areas which we will be trying to work with you on And today's program is in the context of that mentoring and networking. And Mariam will give you some evidence-based practical insights into what mentoring is and how to progress it. And we also have opportunities around leadership development, both in the Women's Health Research Translation Network, but also as a critical part of this NHMRC program. And we'll put some links in the chat for you as well. So I'm going to hand over on that note to Mariam, who's going to tell you all about what mentoring is and how to do it. Over to you, Mariam.
Thank you so much, Helena, and welcome everybody to this session. So like Helena said, our focus today is on mentoring and networking, which a lot of the evidence shows is one of the most critical interventions that supports women in advancing their careers and in developing their skill sets. Now, before I begin, I would like to thank all the participants that have contributed to our pre-seminar survey. Your responses don't only add value to our research, but they also help us customize and shape this program to make it as relevant to the audience as possible. And so without further ado, let us dive into what mentoring is all about. At the bottom of your screens is a Q&A session. As we're going through today's content, if a question comes up, we have a wonderful panel of experts and of leaders that are going to be talking to you at the end of this session. So please type in your Q&A. Our wonderful Linda Skinner is going to be managing that. And by the end of the session, Helena Teed will be moderating the panelists' Q&A. And so whoops, there we go. So what is mentoring? One of the biggest challenges about understanding what mentoring is, but also about accessing mentoring or about getting it right, is that there's no clear definition out there about what it actually is. And what we've summarized from a lot of the work that's out there is actually we need to have a little bit of a shift in perception as to what mentoring is. So whether you are a mentor or you are seeking mentoring, you need to approach this idea, this concept, as a collaborative, mutually beneficial learning relationship. Now, this is really important because first, it places the onus of responsibility on both parties, but at the same time, it makes sure that you're working together in order to achieve goals, as opposed to one person on the receiving end waiting for the other person who's much more senior, much more, usually a lot busier, to just give them support and give them advice. So let's start this session with this shift in understanding. And I was really glad to see that almost 65% of you rated the value of mentoring as very, very high. One of the things that, because we look at this from the context of leadership, the research shows that actually there are a lot of things that contribute towards career advancement, but mentoring and accessing support within that context was 80% of the level of support that helped CEOs advance in their careers. Now, this is not to say that other things don't help. They do, but finding the right mentor and finding someone that can help guide that process is actually quite critical at the career inflections where you're moving from leading yourself to leading others, to leading groups, to leading impact. And so as you move through those levels, it's really important to think, well, what role can a mentor play in my career here? Now, some of you might be thinking, well, how is mentoring different from training? I've been to leadership training before. I've attended 3 days here, 2 days here, 1 week there, and it's been really great, and I feel ready to lead now, and I'm going to go and make all these decisions. That's fantastic. But the key difference, and this is kind of how the literature, especially around business and mentoring within sort of the development field and HR development area talks about this, is that training tends to sit in a very factual, very explicit information sharing space. So the relationship you have with a trainer is often very short, it's very structured, it's very timely, It's kind of like what I'm doing here, where I'm sharing a lot of information with a broad group of people, and it's usually the same information that's not quite tailored to your individual needs, even though we've tried to do that as much as possible. Now, when that relationship starts to be less explicit, takes a little bit more time, is a little bit stronger, and is a little bit more personalized and customized to your needs, that's now entering into the space of coaching. And coaching tends to be a service that you can either pay for, you can hire a coach, or you can work with someone where they have agreed explicitly to coach you on particular skills. Now, in some workplaces, this is available. In some workplaces, it's not. Now, the most elusive of them all is the mentoring. Why? Because it tends to be less factual, less explicit, focused on the behavioral. It's focused on your decision making. It's focused on your strategies. It's focused on really assessing what is happening now, but also forward thinking. And while there's overlap with coaching, these tend to be the longest, strongest relationships that tend to be fully driven in terms of content by your individual needs. Now, that distinction is really important because I invite you all to stop and ask yourself right now, where am I? Am I at the point where I need training and development? Do I need to find myself a coach because my needs are quite explicit? Or do I need to find myself a mentor? And so these are really good distinctions between the two, especially around mentoring and coaching, because there is quite a lot of overlap. But one of the things that really hit the nail on the head for me here are the last two. Mentoring is relationship-based. The relationship is critical. It is core. It is so important for the success of a mentoring relationship. Whereas coaching tends to be task-based. It's very much not focused on the person. Rather, it is focused on performance on specific tasks. And then the second one, which really hits the nail, is a mentor will often provide opportunity and open doors and show you things that you may not have thought of. I am here today because of a mentoring opportunity. So I didn't know about this seminar. Anybody could be delivering this who's on the project, but this is an opportunity that was provided to me by my mentor. And so it's really important to kind of think about this distinction in terms of what do I need at the moment and where do I go from here? Now, let's say you've decided I need myself a mentor, or I am a mentor. There are different levels of mentors that you can have. Some of you may already know people that satisfy one or two of these tasks or roles in your life and in your career. Now, we'll start from the bottom, number 5, and work our way up. The difference is at the level of influence a mentor may have on your career decisions and on the kind of opportunities that you get. So it's influence on you as a person, but more broadly, the kind of influence they may have around what you can achieve. And so a mentor can be someone who is as casual as a sounding board, someone you meet with regularly, where you're able to discuss ideas, where you may entertain some options and ask for them to help you validate some of these ideas. Now, at this point, I usually get someone thinking, that just sounds like a friend. Well, if we think how important the role of relationships are in having a successful mentoring relationship, it makes sense to draw that conclusion. Now, we're not saying that all mentors are your friends, but the qualities of the relationship is just as critical and just as important. So there's the elements of friendship like trust, reliability, respect, and so on. The difference is that this is someone who you trust to go for your career advice and for your career development. Now, as you go up the ladder.
Yeah, Marion,
just on that,
no, it's all right. Just on that, that's a really important point. And it's one of the reasons that Marion will allude to why a structured organizational program where you're paired up with a mentor does not work in the majority of cases. So it might work for a little bit of these lower levels, and Mariam will talk you through these, but think about this in terms of this really needs to be self-motivated, and Mariam will outline that, but that's the critical bit that is most important. It's people you respect, people you have a relationship with, and it has to be self-motivated. Otherwise, it tends to be at that lower level. Over to you.
That's an excellent point, Helena. And I actually, this is one of the biggest challenges, is that there's a lot of organizations that already do mentoring programs, and they do the matching. And the reason it doesn't work is it's a bit like a lottery. You don't know who you're going to end up with, what numbers you're going to end up with. And so it's really important here that there's as much thought that goes into the mentoring relationship as in the content itself. And so as you move from the sounding board, you have people who might be your challengers. And these are not official names. These are just names to help describe kind of the type of advice and the type of impact and influence they may have. But a challenger is someone who will critically challenge you and actually really, really put a mirror in front of you and ask you whether you're making the right decisions. You may have mentors who role model for you. And this is actually one of the biggest issues when we look at it from a gendered perspective, is women don't have very good access to role models in their specific careers. So finding someone that will role model a mentoring relationship for you is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And so this one's really challenging. But once you've reached this level, you now know that you're actually getting to the point where someone is heavily influencing your career. And then the top two is someone who provides guidance and advice. So very explicitly can tell you how and what and where and when to do things. And number one, which I guess is the gold standard in mentoring, is defined as sponsor. Now, it would be very nice to just sit back and have a sponsor come up to us and say, hey, I would love to sponsor you. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen for everyone. Some people might get that, but that is the exception. And so for people who are seeking that kind of influence in their careers and that kind of level of development, then it's really important to harness and forge those relationships in order to be able to acquire a sponsoring mentor. And this is someone who will promote you as an individual, who will improve your visibility. And often it is much easier to get a sponsor at certain levels of your career once you're starting to soar. And so I don't need to sell mentorship to you. The benefits are huge, but this is the top group of what the literature says, is that it really provides you with a toolkit to develop your skill set. It helps you with decision making, with making choices, gains increase in confidence and self-belief. And even that one, even though it sounds a little bit abstract, it's for me, it's probably one of the most important ones, because what the literature shows is that confidence is a big issue, and when it comes to women in leadership, and we're going to come back to that a little bit later on. And number four is about having dedicated time and to actually put aside that time and make time for it. And I know that I'm talking to a wonderful group of very accomplished academics. So the concept of giving yourself time might not sound logical, but part of developing that mentoring relationship is really finding the time to dedicate it to developing and to reflecting on your career. And then jumping to the last one, and I think this is probably the most important, it's around being able to know when it is time to change direction. Should I get on this project? Should I get on this grant? Is this important? Do I say yes to every single opportunity? What we know is that that's not a very strategic approach to career development. So when you start to grow in your career, trying to make decisions around what is right and what is wrong, what is the important decision for your career trajectory, that's really where a mentor comes in. But like we said earlier, it's not a one-way relationship. It's a two-way relationship. There's a mutually beneficial exchange. And the best way I like to think about this, because I think one of the challenges of getting a mentor is this perception that we're asking for some help, and we're asking for time, and we're asking for people to find the goodness in their heart to help mentor us. But actually, we need to shift that to, what do you offer in a mentoring relationship? And if you're a mentor seeking a mentee, what are you looking for in a mentee? Do you have time to just mentor anybody? Or are there specific people that you are looking for because you have needs that can be met through that mentoring relationship? I really love this paper, which was extracted from a 2018 study. This diagram, which kind of, to me, really sounded like the PhD experience. When someone starts as a graduate student, they're in that mindset as an early mentee as well. But when you think about how supervisors select their PhD students, what are they looking for? They're looking for much more than academic performance. They're looking for people who have certain characteristics, who have certain types of experiences, who write at a certain standard, who can speak to a certain standard. And so at different levels, the more you have in terms of those characteristics that you can provide to a supervisor, the more competitive you become. And so as a PhD student, one of the things that, especially through our department, is we try and teach, how do you actually now start to talk about yourself, your achievement? And we do that through a weekly session called Showcase Me. And the idea here is that as a mentee, you offer something too. And we'll go through a very simple process of how you can capture that next. But some examples here is as simple as providing ground level insight. You're in the trenches doing a lot of the actual groundwork. And so you're able to help communicate that back up to someone who's in a leadership position. And sometimes for a mentor, it's an absolute privilege to mentor someone like you. And so don't assume that someone just won't have time for you, because it might be that it brings them personal fulfillment, or it brings them an increased understanding of their role. And so step number one that we're going to go through today is to really get to know yourself, your strengths, your traits, your skills, and be very specific. What do you offer? I've put two examples here. These are from actual people. And even though they've communicated this, one is a mentor, one is a mentee, even though they've communicated this, it's not something that was explicitly saying, you must work with me because I do this. It is very much how they communicate their strength and their skills. So I'm big picture, forward thinker, and I can show others what the future looks like. This is what a mentor might be able to provide to a mentee. Great. If that's what you're looking for, that's fantastic. I'm great with detail and I can be trusted to deliver high quality groundwork. That is a mentee offering back to a mentor. So it's really important to be able to conceptualize, what is it that you're good at? What do you do with excellence? What are some causes that you care deeply about? And you need to think broader than your day-to-day work, than what you offer in research. What are your most important values when it comes to work? What projects do you want to get involved in? What are some things you enjoy doing? And so on. And take that and really conceptualize what it is. Because what you're good at is what you offer. And it's what you bring to the relationship, and vice versa. Now, to some of you, this might be the first time someone has said this to you, and you're like, oh God, where do I even begin to think about what I'm good at? I might be good at this, I might be good at that. There are so much resources, validated, highly reliable resources online that can help you get started with that conversation. A couple of my favorites are the MBTI test. And I'll share with you a link, a free link that allows you to do something that is similar to the MBTI, that is highly validated, but that actually allows you to come up with a personality inventory. And then the Barrett Value Center, only because it is the quickest, shortest values question. It's a single question, and it just helps you come up with a list of top 10 things that you might want to start conceptualizing around your growing edges. And so let's pause here for a second, type in any questions you may have, and have a think. What are 3 things that describe your growing edges? If you have pen and paper in front of you, and I'm assuming everybody does, then please write those 3 things. What parts of you are you yet to develop? And those are the 2 links here for the Value Center and the 16 personalities. If you've done the 16 personalities before, because it is quite a popular, I believe over 1.5 million people have completed that. And it gives you your 4-letter MBTI for the Myers-Briggs inventory list personality code. Do it again. See if it's changed. Okay. To describe your growing edges, what are 3 things? And I want everyone to walk away from this seminar today thinking, that's my number 1, that's my number 2, that's my number 3. And it's okay if you don't know, go to these sites and they'll help you come up with at least 3.
And Mary, Mike, if I can just add in there. So what Mary means by growing edges can be highly variable. It's the areas that you, I love the term. I've got so many parts of me to meet still, even at my age and stage of career, there are still many parts of me to meet. Hopefully the part that loves travel, I would like to meet that one again. But in terms of the growing edges and the 3 things that you might be about to do, that might be that you're about to move into an early postdoc career. You might be about to take on a PhD student, or you may be about to grow your team, or you may be about to step into a CI role and have a project, or in a clinical context as a health professional, you might be about to take that next step or go into a board committee and have leadership roles. So there's all sorts of opportunities, and it's what Mary's describing there about growing edges is not so much the activity of going on a committee or taking on a student, but the fact that you're going to need to take on different roles and build different skills and bring that to the table. And we often don't think about that. And without recognizing that when we go into a new role, we just think we should do it. And I have to tell you, doctors are the worst. They just think they know how to do it because they have lots of technical skills. And in fact, researchers are probably second. So this concept of taking on a new role, you don't have the skills because you went to university for, I don't know how many years. Indeed, from a personal perspective, I did 18 years of medical education, specialty and a PhD, and then did an MBA, which was the best and most intensive education I've ever had. So just to highlight thinking a little bit broader than just the role, but the skills you're going to need, because otherwise you set it up to make it very hard for yourself. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Helena. And that's a really good distinction, especially when you're in the trenches and can only think about what you do. It's really good to step outside of that and think about, well, it's more about how you do and why you do, and so on. Thank you. Now, it's important for me to also kind of stop here for a second and put things into a little bit of perspective, because I don't feel right, and I've shared this with Helena before, that when we talk about leadership training or when we talk about mentoring or we talk about all these things, it tends to come across like it exists in a vacuum, but it doesn't. There are some very real barriers that exist within the society that we live in, within the organizations that we work for, that even though a lot of them are non-intentional, they do come as systemic barriers that can get in the way. So having a little bit of awareness of what these are is really important, because what the research tells us is that they disproportionately impact on women, and in particular, in the sciences and in academic medicine, they impact on research productivity, on promotion success, on career satisfaction. And so to ignore them is to kind of really leave out the context under which all this exists. However, this is not to demoralize. This is to ask you to challenge, to use this awareness to become more strategic about your careers and to actually embed some of this knowledge into how you approach your career development and your mentoring relationships. And so some of these barriers exist at the individual level, whether it's imposter syndrome, and I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a room with the most accomplished women in a leadership program, directors and managers and heads of, that still have this horrible feeling of being an imposter, that they don't deserve where they are. But this is driven by a masculine mythology, especially in academia. This image of the lone scientific male wolf is still very strong and very pervasive. And so for women, this is something to be really aware of. The motherhood penalty is still alive and kicking. And of course, unconscious bias, where there seems to be a very narrow view of what leadership looks like in academia or in medicine or in healthcare more broadly. And so how do we challenge that? How do we actually take what we're good at and make that work? And at the organization, notice, is there a lack of senior leadership support? And actually, the fact that you're all here today just shows really excellent level of leadership support and a culture that really embraces evidence-based practice around mentorship and around supporting women. Failing to build support for continuity, or a lack of evidence-based methods, which is what we were talking about before with the random matching of mentors and mentees. And we're on a mission to change some of that. And so it's really important to know that these things impede women's careers. But I'd like to add to them number 2 and number 3 here, where the career paths themselves might be gendered. So they are designed by men for men, which means that they often undervalue the unseen work. A lot of women's work tends to be unseen, which means that they're not captured in your typical performance indicators. They're not measured. Things like avoiding conflict or building a team or keeping the peace or strengthening relationships. A lot of these things tend to be to go unnoticed, but they also tend to be the things that women drive really well. And so be aware of that. Be aware, how do we communicate that in a way that helps us get ahead in our careers? And then, of course, women's lack of access to networks and sponsors, which is what we discussed earlier. So a lot of these issues, they're quite powerful, but they're very subtle, and it kind of just feels like there's something in the water. You're not quite sure what it is, but just being aware of it and discussing it in the context of your mentoring relationship is really, really important. Now, it was really exciting for me to find out that almost a third of you, over a third of you, currently have a mentor, which is great. So what this should add is just an understanding of where you're placed with that mentor. Is one mentor enough? Do you need multiple mentors? Do you get what you need? And is it really reflective of what the evidence shows? And almost half, 44% of you intend to seek one in the future, whether or not you've had one before. Now, at this point, I'd like to remind everyone that we will make these slides available, so you don't have to be furiously writing the notes, especially that I provide a few checklists here and there. But these are really questions to ask yourself around your readiness to pursue a mentoring relationship and to manage it. Because like anything else, it is time consuming, but it is of extreme importance to your career. Which leads us to point number 2, around mentor selection. So here we are, we're ready to really get into this and find a mentor. Now, while this really is about mentee finding mentor, it works the other way around. If you're a first-time mentor who's looking for a mentee or who's wondering why your mentoring relationship isn't working out, this is really, really relevant. And so some of the barriers that you have outlined towards getting a mentor or selecting a mentor is about identifying one. And I'll help you with that in a second. That was the top one with almost 50% of the responses rating this as the number 1 issue. Access to potential mentors. And this might seem as an issue when you're looking inside your own space, but what we're going to invite you to do is to actually go outside of that space. Lack of confidence, when we talk about that. Initiating a mentoring relationship, that's probably the one that feels the toughest, and is strongly associated with the one above it. But I think that we are able to get past that once you get all the information today. And then that mentor not having time for you. Helena and I had a wonderful chat with someone, Professor Kathleen Riach from the University of Glasgow a few weeks ago. And she's writing a chapter about the concept of vicarious labor, which is a concept relevant to women and women's perception of how much they need to do in order to take care of others. So think about the last time you had to visit somewhere or go into a new department or go into a new meeting. If the leader is a woman, she's doing everything to make sure that you are taken care of. That's typically what happens, not every time. But if the leader is a man, they're often just there for the meeting, and they have their assistants and their PhD students and their PAs and so on running around doing everything else. And so this idea of vicarious labor is actually really embedded and socialized in how women think about time. And I challenge you to think about that when you think about how much time others have to help you. So keep an eye out for this paper when it comes out very soon. So there are 5 things that are really important when you select a mentor. What the research says that actually when you want to find a mentoring relationship that works, you need to meet the other person at these 5 levels. Number 1, you must have alignment on values. You must want to work on the same things. I want to work on leadership and gender. It will not help me to find a mentor that is not interested in leadership or gender. Our values have to be very aligned around what is important in society and in work and so on. And so values are really, really important. Number 2, communication. This is, even though it comes as the second, it is as much of an importance as values, because if you can't communicate with your leader, you have different communication styles. Your leader speaks in the detail, but you're a big thinker, you're a big picture thinker, or vice versa, then it's not going to work out. Okay, so communication style and communication cadence is really important. How often can you talk to them? Number 3, which is kind of obvious, is willingness. Does this person actually want to mentor you or not? Are they being forced to mentor you? Did someone ask them to do it and they really don't? Willingness is really important because it will tell you how invested they are in this relationship. 4 is around expectations. What's this relationship going to look like? Are we going to be the type of mentoring exchange that happens on a monthly basis, on a 6-monthly basis? Are we going to be doing this over the phone? Are we going to be going out for coffee? What's it going to look like? And of course, last but not least is personality. You are gonna have to like your mentor and vice versa. If you don't like them, it's not gonna work. And so personality does weigh in really well here. And this is where I'll take you back to the MBTI test. It's a really good conversation starter as well to see if someone can align with you on that. This is one of the comments that I anonymously pulled out of our feedback. And I think it's really important to share this because it confirms, when I see things like it just confirms what the research tells me, it just confirms it to me. And here, this participant said, I recognize the extreme workload of academia, particularly for people with caring responsibilities. This is the type of academic I would like to be mentored by because I want to get meta. I love that, get meta in terms of seeing how that workload fits in life. But to do that would draw on that person's time to fulfill their work. And that just presented to me the perfect dilemma. You want someone that role models that can mentor you in that example, but at the same time, you don't want to take their time. This could be impacted by vicarious labor. This could be impacted by false perception. This person might actually benefit from mentoring you, and therefore their load is lighter. They might learn things at the ground level that makes them realize, actually, I don't need to be going into that much detail. This isn't necessary. Now I'll stop here because I think it's really important to ask Helena to weigh in on that, because Helena is one of the busiest people I know in my life, yet she has time to mentor.
Thanks, Miriam. So this is a really nice dilemma you've described there, and there's comment in the chat too. And we won't take too much more time because we do need to get to the panel. But just to highlight that this concept of asking a favour of people for their time. Now, there are some people who, and I imagine Auntie Kerry Daw, for example, there are not as many, for example, Indigenous role models, so they'll often have many people come to them for mentoring. But the reality is that the worst case scenario, you'll get a very reluctant, I'm really sorry, I can't, but have you thought about, and to think about what that looks like. But the reality is it's such a joy to do this. It doesn't take a lot of time and it feeds the soul. And so, you know, sometimes my mentoring discussions are in the car at 5:30 on the way home at night. Sometimes they're coffee, sometimes they're other things. But don't see this as some massive favour that you're asking from someone. Typically, your male colleagues will not think about that. It's a transactional relationship. So you will feed the soul of people who are mentoring you, and don't underestimate that. This is not a big time commitment in general. So I think just believe in yourself, recognise it's part of the role of a senior person, and ask with the worst outcome possible that they can't do it at the moment. So thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Helena. And I always ask myself, what's the worst I could do? I could just say no. Then you move on and find the next person. And this is actually one of the biggest contributors to why men's networks, aside from mentoring, networks tend to be more effective than women's networks in terms of career opportunities, because they tend to be more transactional, less interactional. And so just food for thought. And whoever wrote this, thank you very much for sharing that. This is a great book out there for those of you who have time to do some extra reading on the side. This is written by Janine Gardner. She is an Australian author, and she wrote a book called It's Who You Know. And this is actually about how to build a network of 12 key people in your life, not just in your career, in your life, that help fast track you and help you make the best decisions for that work-life balance, for that career development, and so on. So if you have time, find that book and give it a read. It's actually quite a digestible book. But the ideal mentor characteristics, according to what the evidence says, is that obviously, like we mentioned, they have an interest in doing this for you. They need to be further in their career than you are. And there's still debate out there as to whether or not they need to be exactly mirroring what you do. It really depends on what kind of mentoring you require, whether that person has the exact career trajectory that you want, or they just have the experiences that you want, and therefore they're still able to mentor you. They need to be able to provide a safe environment, because you're going to be sharing things that are not necessarily always straightforward. They might be problematic. There might be interpersonal conflict. There might be career change decision-making. And so safety and psychological safety, not just physical safety, is really, really important in this mentor characteristics. And so if you are a mentor, ask yourself this question: do I provide a psychologically safe environment where this person can say whatever they need to say in order to get the answers they need? And I'm going to jump to the last one here, because that's if you really hit the nail on the head. They just help you get where you want to go faster, more efficiently, and with greater joy, because you get to skip a lot of the hurdles that you would usually have to go through if you were doing it on your own. I'm not an academic, despite doing a PhD and all that, but what I've noticed about the academic environment is that it is a very lonely, or it can be a very lonely environment. And I think that not just as women, but as career individuals, as people who are trying to, through our research, make a huge difference, we need to change that. We need to find ways where, through our mentoring relationships, our networks, we're actually able to break down those lonely structures and do things as a collective. Another great book about women in leadership, but I'll just take this one excerpt, which is from chapter 12, that getting the right mentors requires the same kind of thoughtfulness and research that goes into other big life decisions. And so I think when you have that little shift to think, wow, actually, this requires a lot more work than what I've been putting into it, you start to realize the impact that you can have from a mentor will be equal to or greater than the kind of work that you put into finding the right person. Now, some typical phases of mentoring. And I usually put this at the end, and then I never have enough time to go through it. And so I've moved it up today just because I think it's really important to show that at this point here, and this is a summary of the kind of work that goes into building a relationship with a mentor. The first step and the most important one is that building of rapport. It's the developing of the relationship. It's where there needs to be a getting to know you phase before you actually get into the nitty-gritty of setting the direction of where the relationship might go. And I think one of the issues that I've seen in my time, even beyond the work that I'm doing now, I have a background in corporate environments and participated in hundreds of mentoring programs, is people just jump straight into the direction that they need. And they jump straight into, I want to achieve this, I want to do this, which is great. But actually, if you stop and really think about that first step around building rapport and harnessing that relationship, your outcomes are going to be a lot better, because you're going to end up with a person who's highly invested in giving you what you need. Number 2 is obviously around setting direction. 3 is about making progress. Well, how do you make progress? What kind of things do you need to measure? What kind of things do you need to be asking? What kind of things do you need to be measuring? What do you agree on when it comes to the cadence of the mentoring relationship? How often are you going to be meeting? What kind of things is it okay to discuss? What kind of things is it not okay to discuss? Are you going to have one mentor or multiple? And so on. And then the last part, which is just important as the first part, is mentors are not necessarily there forever. There might be a point where you may need to move on. The relationship has come to its natural conclusion, right? And so how do you recognize that time? And how do you discuss it openly with that person? And then how do you celebrate that success? And often moving on might come with changing positions, changing departments. It might just come by changing area of responsibility or life circumstances, right? My recommendation is when you're moving on, don't just let it fizzle out. Make a point of celebrating that relationship and that success, because you never know, that person might one day connect you with someone else, or they might come back into your life. This will also be available for you to look at later. The 3 takeaway messages from selecting a mentor or finding a mentor: they need to explicitly agree, because they will provide the impetus and direction, and they will have a huge influence in determining your career path. And so choose wisely. And remember, one mentor is often not enough. Finding the perfect mentor is like finding perfect boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. You're never going to get someone who's got everything. So what are the most important characteristics that are ideal for you? And how do you find that in one person? And maybe find someone else that provides all the other things. And so I'll just pause for a few seconds here. Describe in the same piece of paper that you've been writing your 3 growing edges on. What are 3 characteristics of your ideal mentor? What are the top things that would actually really make it work? And remember, if you have to forge that connection, let it go. It's not going to work. It has to be natural. It has to be organic. It has to come together in a way where you've put in the hard yards, and now you can start focusing on how you're going to work. And sometimes actually those relationships just occur naturally. And suddenly you realize, I've been meeting with this person for the last 5 years, talking about everything over coffee in a very informal session. Oh my goodness, I've been getting mentored. And so it's really good to recognize when that's happening. So think about those 3 characteristics of your ideal mentor. And this leads us into our final section, which is the most important section. And it really addresses this concept of confidence and courage. Because you must find courage in forging that connection. Not all of us are born with natural confidence. Not all of us are extroverts. Some of us are quite introverted, and it's really difficult to have to go to these events and to have these conversations. And so my advice to you is that is Brené Brown's advice down here, that you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't choose both. And so which is it going to be? This is a fantastic book, Dare to Lead. I've read it multiple times because it just touches something really important, not just about leadership in general, but actually about us as women, where I think there's this element of socialization where we're taught to kind of step back and wait to be asked, wait to be given. And it's really important from a gendered perspective for us to step out of that and to feel the discomfort and to feel the anxiety and to kind of do it anyway. A couple of ways we could do that is to do your research on the candidate. Don't approach someone blindly. Try to really get to know them. It's really funny when the other day, Helena actually shared all this information about a coaching session that she had with her coach, her career coach. And I was sitting there going like, is anybody else taking notes? Because this is the kind of stuff that you need to find out about your leader or the person that you want mentoring from, because it helps you forge that connection. It helps you to really understand, well, who's that candidate? How do I approach them? What's important to them? How do they work? Do we have the same values, etc.? So if you remember those 5 things that are really important, do your research. Find them on LinkedIn. Ask people about them. Warm connecting is the opposite of cold calling. Cold calling is when you literally just pick up the phone and ring someone. I don't know if that happens these days with marketing companies, but cold calling often doesn't work in these circumstances because you're a complete unknown entity. And so try and find a warm connection. What this means is find someone who knows someone who can introduce you to that someone. Number one, it automatically brings in trust and reliability to that relationship because you've just been introduced by someone that this person knows, and that's really important. And number two, think about who's introducing you. Like, I know that if Helena introduces me to someone, I don't have to sit there and prove my credibility because Helena T just introduced me, right? And so think about that when you're trying to connect with someone. Can you find someone who will introduce you? And that you can actually, if you're working with them, you can just go up and ask them and just say, I'd love you to introduce me. Are you able to do that? And then prepare your approach. There's nothing worse than that feeling of being at the right place at the right time with an excellent opportunity and being unprepared for it and not knowing what you're going to say. So I urge you all, when this is over, to actually sit and prepare your approach. This really helps with what we know is a massive confidence gap that women have. Now, obviously, when we talk about women here, we're talking about women as a collective. The research is throwing us all in to the same basket. But aside from what the individual woman experiences around confidence, what the evidence shows is that to succeed, your confidence, a demonstration of your confidence, is just as important as your competence. Just working away really hard and hoping that someone will notice is not enough. It's important to work away, but also learn how to talk about it, learn how to show that confidence. And unsurprisingly, very consistent with the research, 51 of the respondents to our survey of you believe that self-confidence limits your career advancement. And it is a particular crisis for women. It is a gendered issue, not because something's wrong with women, but because the environment that we work in kind of perpetuates it. So it creates this catch-22 where there's a double standard to how we operate, showing confidence and showing assertiveness and showing that you know what you're doing is often incongruent with how leadership is seen and how women are perceived. So it's incongruent with typical feminine traits, and therefore women are in a way taught to suppress that. And so you've got that double standard. But at the same time, you've also got the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is so rife in healthcare and so rife in academia. And it's where there is this massive gap where as you start to know more, and research to me, academia is you're always in this space because you're always learning more. You're always discovering more. You're in discovery research, you're clinical research, you're always on that journey. And so you're in this valley of despair and you're trying to pull yourself out where you're at a place where you're like, I know this stuff, I understand, I have the confidence to really step into this space, but we're surrounded by others who know much, much less and who feel and truly believe that they know much, much more. And therefore, we're plagued with this Dunning-Kruger effect, and that affects our day-to-day interactions. One of my favorite sayings by Mark Twain is that you cannot be comfortable without your own approval. And so I invite you at this point to give yourself permission, give yourself approval to be comfortable in your own skin and to really, really, really focus on how do you come across as confident. And it is actually one of those things where the research shows that the more you practice being confident, the more you become confident. Another beautiful comment from our participants. When I requested a mentor for myself, it was pushed to periphery. It has been difficult securing a mentor for myself. And I know how that feels, because especially if you're working to build up that confidence and you go and you ask someone and then you get rejected, that can really damage your confidence and take you back to square one. And so I really urge you, take your time to heal from that moment and recover, but get back up and do it again. And do it again and do it again and get really comfortable with no. Get really comfortable. I still remember the first time my paper got rejected, but it got rejected by the Lancet, and I was so upset. Elaine had to look at me and say, it's okay. We all get rejected at one point or the other. You get used to it. So the same sense with the same concept, get used to the rejection, accept it. It's part of the journey. It's part of the experience. 3 things you can do here. Preparation and mindset. The more prepared you are, the more confident you will feel. And it really helps get you into the mindset because you know exactly how to approach this conversation. Number 2, review your achievements. Remind yourself, what am I good at? What have I accomplished? What have I published? What awards have I won? What do people say about me? Because that really helps give you a boost. And if you have a really good friend or family member that you can call before this conversation to give you that boost, I do that. I'll call my sister, I'll call my friends, and I'll say, I'm about to walk into a really important meeting and I am just feeling like my confidence is in the ditch. Can you please help? And then source support, get your network out there. Helena, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just quickly before we move on. So as you can see, Miriam's really passionate about this, and thanks for the compliments along the way. We'll move to the panel fairly soon. But I think the critical thing is, and you've really picked it up very nicely, you will falter. I have to say I did laugh when Miriam was devastated her paper wasn't accepted in the Lancet. It was a very high aim to start with, but she got it in the Lancet Serious Journal and there was an editorial in the Lancet. So, it always comes around. So, and it was on this topic of gender equity and advancing women. So don't ever think that you can't do it. And I also just would say that warm connection, as someone's commented in the Q&A, really important. You find the mentor that meets all those criteria Miriam's talked about, but get someone else who knows them to introduce you to them. And that's really important. It's a typical networking strategy. Don't get them to find a mentor for you. You find them, you think about them, you plan it, but you get someone else to help you. Back to you, Miriam.
Thank you so much, Helena. And this brings us to the very end around that preparation. But these are some questions that a mentor might ask you. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but it is part of that preparation because you never know what that first meeting is going to look like. And simply asking, when you're at that point where you're able to ask a mentor, a potential mentor or an existing one, to have a meeting, go out for a coffee to get to know each other. These are some things they may ask you. So be as prepared as you need to be in order to get there. And so finally, your takeaway message is know yourself and what you're good at and what your growing edges are. That is part of your preparation. Choose your mentor wisely, do your research and connect that warmth and that connection. And I always say connection before content. It is the most important aspect of this relationship. Number 3, one mentor is usually not enough. Build a network of people. Read that book about the 12 key people in your life. Are your career values and goals aligned? And if you have to force a connection, let it go. You need to forge it, but not force it. And number 5, connect with courage, because confidence is going to win over competence every single time. And number 6, prepare, review, and remind what are your achievements? What have you achieved in your life? And remind yourself that you are worthy. And the final thing is source support in getting your mentor. People will help you, but all the work is going to be your thinking, your reflection, your planning, your strategy, and then find someone that will help you connect with that person. Now, I did notice some questions in the Q&A, Helena.
Yeah, we've been answering them.
Those.
Yeah,
Oh,
we haven't,
wonderful.
but we've actually been, many of us have been linking in there and answering them. We will bring some to the panel. And so we're
Excellent.
listening to our wonderful. Thank you, Mariam. Passionate
Wonderful.
and fantastic as usual. Great. I should tell you that Mariam's doing this at a fairly ungodly hour in the UK, just as she's finishing her PhD. So thank you so much for the time difference.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so just one other thing to add to Mariam's presentation before we move to our great panel for their insights is please don't think narrowly. There were some comments in the questions about, well, what if someone gives away something you've shared in confidence? In an ideal world, your mentor is usually not your supervisor. Sometimes they can be both, but usually not. And it's not even necessarily in your institute or in your group or in your school or your faculty. Think broadly. In fact, my mentors one was in corporate, one was in not-for-profit, one was a completely different sector, but I was looking for skills in leadership at that time, so I looked outside. So I just think we need to not always think that I'm a researcher in aged care or bowel cancer, I want my mentor to be a world leader in those things. Actually think about what you want your mentor to give you, and please think more broadly than the people in your immediate group. All right, over to our wonderful panel. And I'm first going to ask some of you just to reflect on actually what you heard today. And I might start with you, Ravini, just because, you know, whether you are in your career stage, whether you have any specific reflections or things you want to share.
I think, thank you very much, Helena, for that. And thank you, Miriam. It was fantastic. And hello to everyone from the lands of the Wajak Noongar people in Perth. As you can see, it's very cold here today, so I've had to go and put my scarf on. In listening to it, I think there are lots of things that resonated in probably the things of what not to do, because I found myself at the institute that I worked at being put into a mentor program. I had a mentor being assigned to me who I had no choice in who the person was. I didn't even know what were the decisions that were made in connecting me with this individual. And we had one email contact where the person said to me, I'm very busy right now. I'll come back to you in a few weeks' time. And I said, okay. And I never heard back. And I didn't feel like I could actually say, hey, where are you? So I think this having synergies between you and connection is really important, because you need to be able to value who they are. And if you don't know anything about them, how do you value who they are and how they might meet your needs? So I think that's really important. And a lot of the mentorship that I've had has been informal, not formal. So I suppose there is merit in that as well.
Definitely. And in fact, Ravani, that was a classic example of a mentoring interaction, which probably dissuaded you from going back in for other mentoring because it was the wrong way to do it. So it wasn't your fault. Now, I know, Vicky, can I ask you to reflect, because I know you've had a program for mentoring within your organisation that you think has yielded some success. So maybe if you can reflect a little on that, but in the broader context of knowing it usually is about relationships.
Yeah, I think probably the best mentoring relationships I've had have been with people who have got to know me informally through networks. So within my institute, for instance, most people know who I am and have met me at least once or twice. Then in our institute, we do have the random matchup, but normally it is gender specific. So we're normally mentoring younger women within our organisation. those individuals know something about me. I usually know something about them. The mentoring relationships still only work based on the 3 key things, which I think are values, communication, and personality. And if there's not that connection, it's very difficult to move that relationship forward. But I think the key to it is that people know me before they approach me or before they're matched up with me. There's other times when it doesn't work, and that is when you make it compulsory, and that compulsory mentoring relationship often falls over very quickly because one individual, either the mentor or the mentee, just doesn't connect or doesn't want to be there. But still, I think it's the best mentoring relationships I've had is where we've known each other beforehand and then connected.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky, definitely. And sometimes you may not necessarily know them, but you might want to get to know them. So making an effort, going up to their poster at a meeting, actually asking them to come and, are you grabbing a coffee? I'm happy to buy a coffee, like to have a chat, to find out whether you have that connection before you want to go on and plan a mentoring relationship. So getting to know informal is important, but you can put forward those informal opportunities. Now, the wonderful Kate Nagel is the chair of our Workforce Development Committee from all the way up the top end, where it's probably warmer than it is down here, and has done an amazing job in the version of the programs that we've got here. So, Kate, your reflections.
Yes, certainly the things that resonate with me, and it wasn't said exactly like this, but I think the warmth that Miriam spoke of certainly is really that getting to know the person. And I think that focus on the person, on the whole person, is a really important connection. Provides context to what issues are presenting that you're helping to support and guide, but doing it in a way that is that builds that relationship, that trust, and also I suppose individualises that relationship that's brewing. I think that what Miriam spoke about, the preparation, I think I haven't heard anyone speak about it quite as well as you did, Miriam. I think that was really, really critical, and I think that's very useful for all of us to take away. The other things, I just think that practical, that there's so much information, but the practical, it was very pragmatic as well as theoretical, but it was pragmatic, and I think that will be very helpful to many people who are online. Well done.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you. Lorna, your reflections, please.
Oh, thank you very much. And welcome. I'm sitting in Mabantua in Alice Springs. I think that's a very fascinating topic that you have. And until I was invited to speak, I've had both versions. You're with this person because they're doing the same thing as you are institutionally, but I've never actually, I've put my foot down and I've just said, oh no, I don't think I want to go because, we don't seem to be suited. And even though they may be someone really high up and I'm an early career researcher, how I've dealt with it in my personal life is someone's come to me and asked me to mentor them because they need a little bit of a foot in the institution. I do that, and we go and we just, it's always informal, and it's for however long they want to be with me, and then they go off and do something else. But for me, it is definitely relationships, and I have to know them. Trust is really important. It's usually gendered, so all those things that you mentioned, but it was very it's fascinating research, and I tried to do the personality thing on there, but I couldn't quite see it on the screen, so I'll have to go back and do that. But yeah, that's been my experience. It's relationships.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell, Lorna. Just before I go to Auntie Kerry, I think, there are a range of different tools you can do, but I think one thing that Miriam's, there's probably a lot to think about from that talk about, just to really emphasise, mentors are absolutely for women one of the most empowering things you can have. And can I also, I can't remember whether you touched on this, Miriam, male mentors are usually the most successful. And one of the reasons for that is I often think differently to women. So you may have a female mentor who's going to look after you and give you really nice caring advice, but actually you could theoretically get that from friends. Whereas you go to a male mentor, they often may think about getting you into networks or nominating you for prizes or putting you forward for things that we perhaps wouldn't do. And I have to say my mentors were all male originally, largely because when I qualified, there were no female physician academics with children, and that's what I wanted. So I thought, well, they're going to have to be male mentors. They just happened to have wives and I didn't. But the point being that they were amazing. And one of them has been, a sponsor throughout my career and nominated me for pretty much all those letters that are behind my name that I would never have put myself forward for. So I just can't emphasize how important it is. You deserve it. So give yourself the time to do it. Auntie Kerry.
Thank you. So in our communities, I don't call myself auntie, and the community calls you auntie. And to be honest, the university here just put that on my name on my door, so I figured that's who I was when I got here. So and part of what we do is grow people. And in fact, we've just changed the Katsanam program to get them and keeping them, and growing them. So I like to grow people, and that's pretty much what I do. I do like the Myers-Briggs because big surprise, I'm ENTJ, big surprise. And I've noticed and it was only after I had actually done that, because with the team that I was working with, that I realized that the poor little INTP, whatever person, who I always thought, oh, she's such a, really just had different ways of doing things, like she'd have a big list, like I'm not a list maker, but that particular Myers-Briggs mob, they make lists, and it wasn't that she was doing anything wrong, it was just that's how she preferred to work. I mean, that was a while ago, and hopefully I've moved on since then. So I think all of those things are valuable, where you get to know people, and I agree that it's a privilege to mentor people. I haven't always had successful relationships with people. I remember one really aggressive lady came and she said, I didn't get my promotion last time, and I demand that you get me my promotion this time. And I went, well, I'm not a magician. I'm just an academic and an average one of that. So I think it is right. You have open and honest discussions at the beginning, but I approach everybody with unconditional positive regard, because that's one of my core values for others.
Fantastic, Auntie Kerry, and beautiful as usual. I love the open positive regard. I'll come back to Marion for some reflections at the moment, because I've asked Marion to look through the questions and just see if she has any other reflections there. I do believe you're not getting our comments in the chat. If that's the case, we will try and make sure that we do get the comments through to you so that you actually have the links we're talking about. But in the interim, just to highlight that there is obviously the mentoring experience, but there is the thought about leadership development. Please do give yourself a little bit of thought. We're talking about not a lot of time. In your year, in your career, in your day-to-day, these are relatively small. And women generally are very good at tasks. Not all at lists, Auntie Kerry, but there are many people who are. And the people who are not good at lists, link up with people who are, because it will make you so much more powerful. So that's what Marion was joking about. I continue to get coaching and leadership development. Oh, very cute, Auntie Kerry. There's the little grey puppy in the picture there. And more recently I had a coach, because I was thinking about it, just a transition in my career. And I did a profile called the ISQ, which basically looks at your preference for leadership. And it's really fascinating. Didn't think I was going to learn too much more at my career stage, thought I was getting there. But we are always learning. And the funniest things where I learned I was on the lowest centile for competition. So I'm of 2.3 million leaders, I'm below 1% in competing with people. I don't even understand. I don't see that other people are competing with me. I don't even see it coming. But when I went to the end and she was talking about my profile, I have a high care for my team. I do consensus, which is why we all do co-production here. But it was really interesting, because I said to her, what do you see in this profile overall? She said, I see terrible self-care. Really important, because I'm not very good at self-care. So that was a good learning for me. And I said, all right, who will I annoy the most? Who will I have trouble working with? Because there are only a few people, but I do have sometimes some challenges. She said, the most competitive people you work with will find you the hardest to work with, because they will see you as competitive. They will try to compete with you and you're just not there. You just don't even understand what they're doing. And getting that sort of insight is invaluable, because I can go back to those very competitive people and have completely different discussions. So that personal insight is really good to do alongside your mentoring, because you can have those revelations and then go through them with your mentor. Mariam, did you have any reflections on the questions you wanted to share?
I've just been going through a lot of the Q&A, and I want to thank everybody for their engagement and for really thinking about how this applies to them individually. But the only thing I want to say is that there was a comment in there about how do we see leader journeys and know what they did and how they did and all that. That's a great question. If you're not in a context where you're able to do that or to set it up. So one of the things we did at McCree is to ask people to come and showcase a little bit about themselves and to tell us about what they've been doing and they're achieving. And it's a way for us to kind of remove that veil and uncover some of these journeys along the way. If you want a more in-depth experience, ask them out for a coffee. Take them to the cafe in the building and just say, I just want to talk to you about how you did this thing, and be specific, prepare for that meeting and ask them to share that. And I think that's so, so important, because that's where the gold is. And it's where one of the key defining elements of our Women in Leadership program is bringing in speakers to talk about their experience and their journeys. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mariam. Now I'm going to go back to our panel. Anything else, any other pearls you would like to share? Anything you would love to share with people you wish yourself 20 years ago would have been told? Kate.
That's a long way back, 20 years ago. So I think having more understanding about the privilege that it is, that people consider it to be. I think that's one important thing. The other thing I think is network, search for your mentorship in areas that you want to develop, not in your own discipline. I think that's come across a couple of times, but I think that that don't be constrained in your search. And these days also, it doesn't need to be, although there is the person to person, I think is very, very valuable. But these days it is possible that the person that has the qualities and the skills to mentor you could well be overseas. And that, you know, in itself might be a very helpful thing and open up new areas. Be really clear about what it is that you're wanting in a mentorship. Sort of said, it can sort of be amorphous and can be quite sort of, and that's not helpful. I find it's much easier to have, you know, specific aims and objectives that you're looking to achieve, and then revisiting them quite often to ensure that, you know, that's still on train. And I'm a great believer that they have a finite period of time. And it's interesting, Helena, because your experience is you've had mentors for a long time. I myself I mentor and have been mentored for around a specific body of work or skill set, and that for me is good, and then goodbye. And it means you get the opportunity to mentor more people and to be mentored by others as well.
Thanks, Pat. I should specify, I've done that a lot, exactly what you're talking about, but when they've become sponsors, they've been a longer term, and indeed, I'd say I've got 2 sponsors, but the majority of mine were mentors, and then I've had coaches. And Mariam's done a beautiful job of explaining the difference. And the only thing is, coaches are exorbitantly expensive, but otherwise. So I think the challenges we would give you, so we're coming towards the end, we will email you all the links and the content that we've talked about today, because I don't think we're getting through to you in the chat. But just to highlight that this is really about stopping, thinking, understanding you deserve time to plan your career. If you don't, nobody else will. Doing more work will not get your career necessarily where it needs to go. Can I just say that one more time? Doing more work, working harder, will not necessarily get you where you need to go. And when you have a young family or family caring responsibilities or other things that take time, you need to be smarter. And to be smarter, you need to stop and think about yourself objectively. From the balcony, how do I make sure this person has the biggest impact? So on that note, I'd like to really thank Mariam. She's done the most amazing PhD. She has taught me a great deal on my journey, and the people that we have worked in this, the research around gender equity and career advancement has been fascinating, and we've worked with amazing people around the world, and I know her career is going to be amazing. I want to thank the panel. Really great reflections, wonderful song at the start. Only Kerry, I am going to learn it because I just love it every time you do it. Thanks to Kate, who is the champion of our workforce development program. Vicky, who's doing an amazing job leading up the Women's Health Queensland network under ARA. They're setting up a lightning speed that we're having trouble keeping up with. Ravani, who's already involved in the work we're doing, and that's fantastic. Lorna, for sharing your reflections, and the team behind the scenes. So Linda Skinner is the Workforce Development Program Manager at the Women's Health Research Translation Network, and Rebecca and others are there in the background supporting. So thank you very much for that. We will email you, and thank you for doing the survey. You will see that come out in some form, and we will share it with the panel. But it was great to be able to reflect your responses back to you, and for you to know that your thoughts were not alone. Anybody?
Helena,
Yes.
just on behalf of all of us, just recognising your leadership in WHRTN and in all of the activities and fabulous work that's going on. So you're fabulous, and we learn lots from you. We're very grateful to be given the opportunity.
Thanks, Kate. Fantastic. And I'll just, on that note, we will finish up. And just a final comment, which is fantastic, from one of the participants. Thank you for the seminar. I have a spring in my step. So that is just wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.